So we have this JS fiddle that gives us a list and actually allows us to remove using the remove method, and a button that's bound using the click event directive and allows us to remove items from the list. We're going to add a form that lets us add items to the list, and then we've got sort of all the functionality right here. I'm going to switch to tabs view because it's going to be easier to see all of the code if I go here. And so the first thing I'm going to do is just add the form fields to this page. So let me grab these and paste them in so you don't have to watch me type. Okay. So now if I run this, you can see that we have, you know what, I could go ahead and put some BRs in there so it looks better. There we go. So now I have a form that creates a new entry, right? That's not connected to anything yet. I do need some data reflected in the Vue object to connect it to. So I'm going to create a new item of data. Now this is an object literal that right now contains only university list, which is an array. So I need to separate these by a comma. And my next one is going to be, let's just call it new school. And it is an object literal that contains the three fields it needs to contain, right? We're doing city, name, and a Boolean is best, right? So now I have a data element that my form can be bound to, right? So what I would like to do now is actually bind these fields to that new property that's in my Vue object. And the way we do that is simply to say v-model. And in this case, it gets new school.name. And I'm going to go ahead and paste. Model is M-O-D-E-L, not M-A-D-E-L. Okay. And I'm going to paste this one. This is going to be model.city. And the checkbox is a little different, right? This isn't a text field. If we go and look at the documentation, or this is really the tutorial, the documentation is good as well, but the tutorial will give you examples that the documentation doesn't necessarily contain. And we go down here to checkbox, we can see that essentially it simply binds the Boolean value to whether the box is checked or not. You can also do multiple checkboxes bound to an array, but we're just doing a single value, and it's as easy as simply binding it to new school.is best, right? And now that value is going to go true or false depending on whether we toggle this checkbox. If I run this, we should see nothing change. Okay, so now what I've done is created a binding between the form and this thing. But that doesn't add a new item to the list that's appearing in our output. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to need to have a button on that form that says add. Let me go ahead and put the BR on here as well. We're not spending a lot of time worrying about formatting, but it should look okay. And we're going to want to do, let's say it's going to be an add button, and we're going to want to call a method just like we called remove when we wanted to remove an item. We're going to create a button that's got similar behavior, and in this case we're going to just call a function called, maybe we'll just call it add school. And it doesn't need to take a parameter because we're already populating that new school object when we do this. So if I go ahead and run this, add, the button appears, and let's actually go in here and add a new method to our object literal called methods, and this one's going to be add school, and it's a function. And just to make sure we see that it's working, I'm going to go ahead and just stick an alert in here so we know that it's running when we click our HTML button. So I've run that, I click this, and I get an alert box. Okay, so this function is running. What is it that we want this function to do when we create a new, there we go, when we create a new item? Well, one thing that you might think we should do is simply to say, let's see, we could do, I'm going to show you an example of something we really can't do because it won't work, and you'll see why when we do it. I could simply push new school onto university list, right? And if I do that, you would think that that should function. So let's actually try that and see what happens. I'll give you a hint. We're going to go be looking at something related to passing by value versus passing by reference. If I make this new school Brown and it's in Providence, and we'll say that's the best two, and I hit add, whoa, that's not what's supposed to happen. What just happened here? Oh, you know what it is? This button submitted. I have to say type equals button. Otherwise, it treats it as a submit button inside the form. Okay, let's do it again. Brown, Providence is best, add. And nothing happened. Let's go to the debugger. Oh, new school is not defined. This dot new school. Get you every time. Okay. Once again, Brown, Providence is best. Boom. Okay. It appears to have worked. But notice this form is still bound to that object. We have passed the new school object, which is bound to the form, into the array, and it stays bound to the form, right? We're passing it by reference. So we're simply adding a reference to new school to the array, and that's not going to work for us. What we really need to do to make this work is pass in a copy of the new school object so that the new school object that's bound to the array, that's bound to the form, isn't the one that's in the list, because that was not helping us. So essentially what we're going to do, and I'm just going to copy and paste this so you don't have to watch me type it. What we want to pass in here is an object literal. Whoop. And that object literal should contain three properties, which are simply the values, right? These are just primitive values, the strings. These are values that are passed in newschool.city, newschool.name, newschool.isBest. That is going to decouple. So let's go ahead and run this. And now I'm just going to type random characters here. I add it, and you can see that's here, but if I continue typing in these fields, it is not reflected in the HTML because this is a copy of this data. It's not the same object. So then the last thing I have to do here to make this work is clear these form fields, and I can do that simply by resetting the new school values back to their defaults, which are basically empty strings and false. So here's Brown, Providence is best. I click the add button. Brown is added to the list. The name is now, the field is now completely decoupled from it. I could add another institution here. What should it be? Let's add MIT. And that's in Cambridge, and it's the best too. And that gets added and so forth. So this is basically a functioning little bit of Vue, and I can remove one. A functioning Vue application that manages this list. Now, if we wanted to tie this, if this data was going to be reflected off in a server somewhere, and we were going to be making AJAX calls, for example, to a service in order to save these off to a database, we can simply mix in. There's nothing that says if you're using Vue here, you can't add in some jQuery or add in just basic HTML, HTTP request or fetch in order to do other kinds of operations or save to local storage, right? You're not limited by the fact that this is Vue. That doesn't keep you from going down here and adding a function, and closing this whole thing in a self-invoking function. All those techniques still apply. This is still just JavaScript, but it's JavaScript working with a framework provided that helps you do all these other things much more quickly.